At 6:42 a.m. on November 12, 1943, the fog over RAF Bassingbourn hung low and cold. Rows of B-17 bombers shivered under their own engines, the sound rolling like thunder through the English valley. Lieutenant Harold Merrick stood beneath one of them, headset pressed to his ears, his breath ghosting in the air. Beneath the roar, he heard it, a faint metallic tremor from engine number 2, a vibration no one else could detect. To most, it was noise. To Merrick, it was a warning. He knew that this sound was killing men long before the flak ever reached them. By late 1943, the B-17 Flying Fortress was the pride of American air power, but also a beacon in the night. German radar and sound detectors could locate its approach minutes before visual contact. The official cause was engine resonance, a harmless vibration at cruising speed, but Lieutenant Merrick knew better. The Wright Cyclone engines, perfectly tuned in isolation, created a harmonic when mounted on the bomber's airframe. That hum at 480 Hz cut through the night like a siren. It was the fingerprint of death. He measured it again and again, using a reel-to-reel recorder and a handheld oscilloscope borrowed from a communications lab. The readings never lied. The vibration didn't come from the propellers or cylinders. It came from the smallest things, the screws and bolts that bound the skin of the aircraft, each one loosened by less than a millimeter under heat and flight stress. That microscopic rattle formed a symphony the enemy could hear across miles. Merrick submitted his findings in a formal memo to the engineering corps. The reply was curt, within tolerance. He stared at those words for a long time, hearing the sound of engines rising outside, knowing exactly what that tolerance would cost. That winter, the losses came faster than anyone could count. 3 squadrons vanished over Bremen within 2 weeks. Crews reported nothing unusual until the final seconds. Merrick listened from the control shack, headphones on, when the radio burst alive with panic. They found us again. No lights, no signals. How the hell did they hear us? Then static. Silence. Another fortress gone. When the burned wreckage was brought back in pieces, Merrick walked the field with a clipboard, touching twisted metal that still felt warm. He leaned close to the ruined engines and pressed his ear against the cracked cowling. Even in death, he could still hear the faint metallic buzz he'd warned them about. The reports blamed German radar accuracy, not the aircraft itself. But Merrick knew that sound, the hum that betrayed every fortress long before the searchlights caught them. He marked it in his notebook with a single phrase: the sound of being seen. Night after night, Merrick stayed in the hangar long after the crews had gone. He placed microphones along the belly of a grounded B-17, running cables to an old amplifier. Through the headset, he listened not to engines, but to metal itself. The airframe spoke in vibrations, low, steady, and wounded. He tapped each section with a wrench, charting the tones like notes in a song. Every plane had a distinct voice, but a few sang too high, their resonance sharp enough to pierce through the roar of flight. That was the flaw, a harmonic echo born from the alignment of rivets and frame plates. On some aircraft, the pattern lined up perfectly, disastrously, with the rotation of the second engine. One evening, while testing a strip panel, Merrick tightened a row of screws by hand. The tone dropped. The shrill buzz vanished. A perfect half-step lower. He froze, listening. That was it. The difference between detection and silence. He wrote in his notebook, silence comes from precision. The next step, he knew, would mean breaking the rules and saving lives one screw at a time. The next morning, Merrick filed a report. Acoustic resonance between fuselage fasteners and engine harmonics causing detectable signature. Recommend full retorque sequence at variable tension. He waited 3 days. The answer came in one line: unauthorized modification. Refer to Boeing manual. He walked across the flight line clutching the paper, engines roaring above him. It felt absurd that an idea measured in sound waves could be stopped by ink. At the maintenance hut, Lieutenant Bishop glanced at the report and laughed. You think you can beat radar with a wrench? Merrick didn't argue. I think we're telling the enemy exactly where we are. Then tell Boeing, Bishop said. They built the damn thing. But Boeing was 4,000 miles away, and the planes were dying here. That night, Merrick returned to the hangar with a flashlight. He crouched beneath a B-17 and ran his fingers along the joint seams, feeling for loose rivets. The metal was cold and slick. He turned one bolt, a small click, and the sound changed. The hollow ring dulled into a deeper note. He smiled. He spent hours crawling along the wing roots, tightening by instinct. Every few minutes he stopped to listen, the hum shifting like a melody slowly finding its key. When the last bolt seated tight, the entire fuselage sounded different, steadier, quieter, alive. The next day, the test pilot reported nothing unusual, except that the plane felt smoother on takeoff. Merrick asked to run a sound check. The pilot shrugged. If it makes you happy. With the engines at cruise power, Merrick recorded the new waveform. The 480 Hz spike was gone. The line on his oscilloscope flattened into silence. He walked straight to the operations office and handed in the tape. We can silence them, he said simply. The senior officer barely looked up. We don't alter factory torque. It's in the book. Sir, Merrick said quietly, the book is killing us. The officer's eyes hardened. That's enough, Lieutenant. He left the office with his jaw clenched. Rules and fear had louder voices than logic. In the canteen, a sergeant from another crew sat beside him. Heard you're chasing ghosts. Merrick looked at his hands. Not ghosts. Just echoes. The man laughed. Well, make them stop screaming, will you? Merrick decided then that he wouldn't wait for permission. 2 nights later, he chose one bomber, DFL, a veteran of 14 missions. He worked alone, tightening every fastener he could reach. 436 in total. He marked each with a line of red paint. At sunrise, he stood by as the crew boarded. The engines came alive, shaking the ground. But this time, something was different. The roar seemed less angry, the vibration subdued. He listened through his headset. The deadly frequency was gone. He watched the aircraft climb until it vanished into the gray sky, leaving only wind and silence behind. For the first time, the sound didn't hurt his ears. It was the sound of survival. That night, the airfield slept under thin drizzle. Hangar lights flickered against the fog as Merrick moved like a shadow between rows of B-17s. He carried only a flashlight, a torque wrench, and a battered notebook filled with sketches and frequencies. The official order still said no modifications without authorization. He read it once more, folded it, and left it on the workbench. He started with the first bomber on the line. Engine cowls open, panels half removed, rain dripping from rivets. He crouched, placed the wrench on a bolt, and turned, 1/8 of a rotation at a time. Every click echoed like a heartbeat in the dark. He worked by feel, by tone, by memory. After each section, he struck the skin lightly with a screwdriver and listened. When the ringing softened, he moved on. Hours passed. He tightened until his knuckles bled, until the wrench slipped from oil and fatigue. Around him, the night filled with distant artillery rumble from across the channel. The plane stood silent, waiting. At 2 in the morning, footsteps approached. Sergeant Hayes, one of the ground crew, squinted at him through the gloom. You lose something, Lieutenant? Merrick straightened, sweat running into his eyes. Just noise. Noise. The kind that gets men killed. Hayes stared, then nodded once. Then I didn't see you. He turned away. Merrick finished before dawn. 3 aircraft now bore his hidden signature, subtle patterns of red paint beneath the wings, marks only he would recognize. He packed his tools and wiped blood from his palms with a rag. At sunrise, crews arrived, joking and smoking. The engines roared to life, shaking puddles on the ground. Merrick slipped his headset on. The difference was immediate. The field once deafened by metallic shriek now throbbed with a low, smooth hum. a harmony instead of chaos. He followed one aircraft, DFL, to the end of the runway. The pilot waved, oblivious. Merrick raised a hand. When the plane lifted, the vibration faded into silence. Hours later, he sat by the radio in the control tower. Missions to Bremen rarely ended well. The Germans always heard them coming. He waited for the usual early warning, the scrambled chatter, the code for losses. Instead, nothing. At 1900 hours, a voice broke through. Control, this is Lucky Lead. Bombs on target. No pursuit. No contact. We came and went like ghosts. Merrick closed his eyes. He let the static hiss fill the room. For once, silence was victory. When the crews returned, pilots climbed down grinning. They didn't even find us on the scopes, one said. Either Jerry's asleep or we're invisible. Merrick said nothing. He just touched the fuselage of DFL, feeling the faint vibration of cooling metal. Later that night, he returned alone and tightened one final screw on the nose panel. Not because it was loose, but because he couldn't stop listening. The sound was perfect now. No shriek, no echo, only quiet strength. He whispered to the metal, "You'll keep them alive." And in that moment, beneath the rain and exhaust fumes, Merrick knew he had broken every rule that mattered and obeyed the only one that did. The test came sooner than he expected. 3 nights later, mission orders arrived. Deep strike on Bremen's industrial ring. The same route that had swallowed half their bombers last month. The crews moved like men walking into memory. Merrick stood beside the runway with his headset on, listening as one after another the modified B-17s rolled forward. DFL was second in formation. Its engines ran smoother than any other, a low, even drone instead of the metallic shriek that had once cut through the valley. The control officer looked up from his chart. New engines. Merrick shook his head. New silence. At 1921 hours, the planes disappeared into cloud. The base went still except for the faint hum of generators. Merrick stayed by the radio, pencil tapping against his log sheet, marking the minutes. He waited for the first German intercept reports, the usual coded words, eyes on fortress formation. But the frequency stayed clear. 50 minutes passed. Still nothing. Then a signal, lead group approaching target. No radar lock. Proceeding undetected. Merrick exhaled, barely believing it. He leaned closer to the speaker as the bombardier's calm voice continued. Release complete. Turning home. Flak minimal. The return flight took 3 hours. Normally, only half made it back. That night, all 12 appeared through the fog, engines intact, wings flashing in the searchlights. Crews tumbled out laughing, shouting, their faces lit by exhaustion and disbelief. Jerry never saw us, one yelled. They fired blind the whole way. Merrick walked toward DFL. The plane was streaked with soot, but unscarred. The pilot, Captain Harris, clapped him on the shoulder. Whatever you did, Lieutenant, do it again. Merrick forced a small smile. Just tightened a few screws. Harris laughed. Then keep tightening. After debrief, Merrick sat in the empty hangar, the smell of oil and hot metal thick in the air. He set his recorder near the cooling engine and captured the new sound, a smooth, low thrum that faded into nothing. He compared it to his earlier tapes, the violent spikes and resonant screams. The difference was absolute. He wrote in his notebook, DFL, 14 sorties, 0 losses. The silence holds. When dawn came, he stood outside and listened as the next formation took off. Their engines blended into one deep, rolling tone, less a roar than a breath. Even the birds seemed confused. For the first time, the airfield didn't shake the valley awake. The sound of victory was now the sound of restraint. That night, Merrick lay in his bunk, unable to sleep. He replayed the mission logs in his head, counting every minute they had flown unseen. He realized that what he had done, a turn of a wrench, a fraction of tension, had rewritten the physics of survival. And he knew the higher commands would never allow it to stand. By the end of that month, The story had slipped through the hangars like smoke. No official memo, no briefing, just whispers. Mechanics called it the Merrick tune-up. Crews asked for it before missions the way soldiers asked for Lucky Charms. Nobody knew exactly what he'd done, only that the planes he touched came home. At first, Merrick tried to stay invisible. He worked late, signing no forms, leaving no traces except faint red paint marks beneath each wing joint. But other engineers began to notice patterns. Aircraft assigned to his section showed smoother vibration data and fewer mechanical failures. One night, a corporal approached him holding a torque wrench. "Sir, I heard you're the one who listens to planes." Merrick didn't look up. They all talk. Most men just don't have the patience to hear them. The corporal hesitated. "Can you show me?" He did. Quietly, without orders, Merrick taught him how to find the resonance, the soft metallic hum when the frame and engine fell out of sync, and how to kill it with one turn of pressure. Within days, that knowledge spread to neighboring maintenance bays. Soon, other bases were tightening their bolts by ear. Each man developed his own ritual. Some tapped the fuselage 3 times before sealing it. Others hummed a tone they believed balanced the vibration. It became folklore, a strange mechanical superstition that worked. By mid-December, radar interception reports from the German command dropped sharply. Analysts blamed weather interference. The truth was buried under noise and bureaucracy. On base, commanders noticed the numbers. 7th Bomber Group, lowest losses in the division. What changed? No one had an answer. The files read routine maintenance improvement. Merrick kept his head down. But he couldn't ignore what he saw. Engineers from other squadrons sneaking into his hangar at night, listening to aircraft like priests at confession. Each tightening of a bolt, each adjusted screw, was a prayer for survival. Then came a visit from Lieutenant Colonel Reeves, an inspection officer from Ordnance Command. He arrived unannounced, walking the line of aircraft with clipboard in hand. "Why are these fasteners painted red?" he asked. Merrick replied calmly, "Visual markers for vibration check." "By whose authorization?" "Field necessity, sir." Reeves scribbled something. "You're aware that altering torque specs voids airworthiness certification?" "Yes, sir." "And yet you continue?" Merrick met his gaze. "Yes, sir." Reeves studied him for a long moment, then looked toward the runway where another formation roared overhead. Silent, steady, clean. He lowered his voice. "Whatever you're doing, keep it quiet." Officially, it never happened. After that day, no one questioned him again. The method spread further, across England, into Italy, even to the Pacific. Pilots reported quieter birds. German radio operators began filing confused messages. Enemy bombers approaching without sound signature. Detection unreliable. They gave it a name, the Whispering Fortresses. In mess halls, crews joked that the bombers now flew on ghost wings. But Merrick never joined the laughter. He sat alone with his notebook, adding new sketches, torque patterns, acoustic graphs, pressure ratios, a record of a revolution nobody would ever publish. At night, he walked the airfield, listening. The old roar that once shook the valley was gone, replaced by a deep breath of synchronized engines. It sounded less like war and more like endurance. The silence had spread beyond his control and beyond his name. Across the channel, in the gray barracks of the Luftwaffe's radar command near Bremen, confusion turned to frustration. The Würzburg listening stations had gone deaf. For months, the operators had predicted the approach of American bombers by ear, by that faint, metallic hum of 4 engines beating at the same resonant tone. Now the hum was gone. Technicians recalibrated their microphones, checked for interference, even blamed British jamming. But nothing worked. One engineer noted in his log, "Fortress formation inaudible until visual contact. Impossible physics." When the next Allied strike hit Kiel, the entire squadron of B-17s passed through radar range undetected. Anti-aircraft batteries opened fire too late. The bombers seemed to appear out of the clouds like ghosts. Panic rippled through the German command. At a field meeting, an Oberst pointed at the plotting table. They must have developed a new propeller design. Another officer shook his head. Then why does each plane sound different now? Some not at all. A younger technician whispered. Maybe they learned how to hide the sound itself. The room fell silent. Rumors spread of Allied scientists creating acoustic cloaking, of magnetic fields around engines, of supernatural intervention. The Nazi propaganda ministry forbade the subject. Soldiers were told to call it British weather distortion. But the men on the ground knew better. They saw the bombers gliding above them, shadows without thunder. And that silence terrified them more than noise ever had. Understood. Meanwhile, at Bassingbourn, Merrick read the intercepted German broadcasts with quiet satisfaction. Enemy sound detection unreliable. Fortress activity inconsistent with expected decibel signature. The intelligence officer who translated the message laughed. They think we're using magic. Merrick didn't laugh. Magic's just science nobody authorized. In January 1944, American analysts noticed a pattern. The squadrons using Merrick's unofficial maintenance routine showed survival rates 20% higher than the rest. Headquarters called for an audit. Inspectors found nothing unusual, just a field full of planes with fasteners torqued slightly beyond factory limits. They filed their report. No anomaly detected. But the effect grew impossible to ignore. Missions once written off as suicide began returning intact. Crews reported minimal flak engagement, fewer night fighter interceptions. Somewhere deep in the bureaucratic maze, a quiet memo circulated. Unexplained reduction in sound profile observed. Continue current field maintenance practices. No signature, no explanation. In Berlin, frustration turned into paranoia. The Luftwaffe commissioned engineers to replicate the phenomenon. They bolted metal panels to test rigs, spun engines, and tried to match the vanished tone. Nothing worked. It is not a change of metal, one scientist wrote. It is a change of harmony. By spring, pilots referred to the Allied bombers as Flüsternfestungen, the whispering fortresses. They spoke the name with a mix of fear and awe. Some claimed that at night, the bombers' engines merged into one long, low hum, like wind over the sea, arriving without warning and leaving only silence. In one intercepted message from a German night fighter squadron, a pilot reported, "We saw them overhead, black shapes in the clouds. No sound. Even when they passed directly above, the air stayed still." Back at the Allied base, Merrick continued his work unnoticed. He had stopped tightening bolts himself. Others now did it for him, across hundreds of airfields he would never see. He spent his nights in the maintenance hut, reviewing sound tapes, marking frequencies that no longer existed. The roar of the B-17 had become a whisper. Once, Captain Harris asked him, "Do you ever wonder what the Germans must think when they can't hear us coming?" Merrick replied, "They're learning what fear sounds like when it's quiet." The Germans adjusted, of course. They shifted their reliance from sound to radar. But that took time, and time was what Merrick had given the crews. Weeks, maybe months of advantage. Enough to reach deeper into enemy territory. Enough to change outcomes no metal would ever record. In April, an intelligence officer handed Merrick a captured German memo. It was brief and weary. Enemy bombers no longer conform to acoustic pattern. Recommend discontinuing all listening stations until further notice. He folded the paper and slipped it into his notebook. For the rest of the war, those stations would remain silent. That night, he walked the airfield as the next mission lifted off. The ground trembled faintly, but the roar that once shook his bones was gone. The bombers rose into the mist like phantoms, soundless but alive. He stood there a long time, listening to nothing, and thought, this is what victory should sound like. When the war began to turn, The credit went to generals and factories, to radar scientists and strategic bombing theorists. No one spoke of the man with the wrench who had rewritten the music of flight. By summer 1945, Lieutenant Harold Merrick received a quiet transfer notice to a training base in Lincolnshire. His file listed him as maintenance officer, technical support. There was no citation, no recommendation, no record of what he had done. Before leaving Bassingbourn, he walked the flight line one last time. The hangars stood empty except for 2 grounded B-17s awaiting salvage. Their engines were cold now, their metal skin dulled by dust. He pressed his palm against the fuselage and felt nothing, no vibration, no echo, just silence. He left behind his notebooks and tools. One of the younger mechanics offered to pack them, but Merrick shook his head. "They belong here," he said. "The planes understand them better than people do." At the Lincolnshire depot, his new duties were simple: inspect, file, report. He read bulletins describing field vibration adjustment protocols, now standardized across all U.S. air commands. The document was his work, copied and formalized, yet signed by someone else. He traced one line with his finger: recommended torque range adjustment, increased by 3% to reduce harmonic oscillation. The wording was exact. Every value matched his hidden notes. Only the name was missing. In September, when Japan surrendered, the depot erupted with cheers, music, and the roar of idle engines. Merrick stood apart, smoking in silence. The sound of celebration grated against him. He had spent years fighting for quiet. When his discharge papers arrived, the form read, "Service completed with distinction." It was a phrase so general it meant nothing. He took the train north, back to Chicago. The city was loud again, factories humming, car horns, the clatter of a world rebuilding itself. He rented a small apartment and opened a radio repair shop near the river. The sign above the door read, "Merrick Acoustics." He fixed what people brought him: phonographs, amplifiers, cheap speakers. Sometimes he smiled at the irony. After silencing war machines, he now restored sound to broken ones. Customers liked him for his precision. They said he could tune a circuit by ear better than any instrument. One evening, a young veteran came in, curious about the old photo on the counter. A B-17, its wings streaked with rain. "You were on those?" the man asked. "Worked on them," Merrick said. "They say those fortresses got quieter near the end. Some kind of secret engine design." Merrick smiled faintly. "Maybe. Or maybe we just learned how to listen." The veteran laughed and left. Merrick watched the door close, the bell tinkling softly. Years passed. The shop gathered dust and silence, the kind of silence he'd earned. When he died in 1968, the newspaper obituary was brief. Harold A. Merrick, former Army Air Force engineer, survived by wife and son. No mention of radar, no mention of the whispering fortresses. But in the archives of the Air Technical Service Command, a declassified memo dated March 1944 contained a single handwritten correction: reduce acoustic signature by bolt retort pattern, Merrick method verified. There was no signature, only initials long forgotten. That was his monument, a footnote hidden between reports. The man who had given silence to steel, who had turned noise into life, left no statue, no medal, no name. Yet every plane that took off quieter than the last carried a trace of him. In the stillness between propeller beats, in the hum that never rose too high, in the survival bought by precision. The world forgot his face, but not his silence. 20 years after the war, an aerospace engineer named Thomas Avery was reviewing old maintenance archives at Wright-Patterson Air Force Base. Among faded microfilm rolls, he found a handwritten note on yellow paper attached to a 1944 technical order. Silence comes from precision. The signature line was blank. Intrigued, he traced the file back through requisition logs and field modifications. Every path led to one forgotten name: Lieutenant Harold Merrick, U.S. Army Air Forces. There were no citations, No commendations, only recurring references to vibration suppression protocols derived from field testing. Avery realized that every modern torque chart for bomber fuselages had descended from those notes. He presented his findings at an internal symposium. The audience listened politely, then moved on to jet engine designs and supersonic aerodynamics. Merrick's silence did not fit the noise of the new age. Yet the idea persisted. The Merrick pattern, as some engineers began to call it unofficially, influenced how aircraft skins were tensioned, how spacecraft panels were bolted. Even satellites launched into orbit carried echoes of his unseen adjustments, machines built to travel without a sound. In 1969, a museum in Dayton restored a B-17 for display. Technicians discovered faint red paint under the wing seams, invisible beneath later coats. No one knew its meaning. They left it untouched. Avery visited the exhibit one quiet evening. The hangar was empty, the air heavy with the faint scent of oil and dust. He walked to the aircraft and pressed his palm to its metal flank. The steel felt still, patient, alive, exactly as Merrick must have left it. He whispered, "You kept them safe." Outside, the modern world roared with jets, highways, and factories, all built on lessons of vibration and control. But in that silent hangar, surrounded by ghosts of propellers, the truth remained simple. War had once been changed by the absence of sound. Merrick never sought credit. His law survived him. Every machine has a frequency that can betray it, and a human ear willing to listen can make it disappear. The world had long forgotten his name. But every time an aircraft lifts from the ground in perfect stillness, it remembers him.